Welcome everybody. This is the instruction video on how to use the contents of this kit to turn your Savi saber into a full Xenopixel. So we are just going to dive in here. We'll have this a little bit later, but for now we're going to go through what is included with the kit. Have some fine decals. This little guy is going to be important a little later. We have the chassis. This is where pretty much everything is going to be. That's your soundboard here, your speaker, battery and battery holder, and all your connectors. This is going to slide right into your existing chassis. We'll get to that in a little bit. We have your switch, your charger, and that's your blade connector to go inside of the chassis. Cover the installation of all of these. And very important, this is your charger. Only use this charger to charge it. If you try to use a big brick that comes with your iPad or your PowerBook, you could very easily fry the soundboard. So, comes with a charger, use your charger. Oh, and last but not least, we have your LEDs. These can get a little kinked up during shipment, so just give them a nice stretch out and everything is all set to go. Before we get started in earnest, I want to go over the tools that you're going to need to accomplish this. First off, and maybe most important, a T8 Torx bit. Most of the screws inside of it are going to be the Torx. For those that are not Torxes, you're going to need a small Phillips head. Personally, I like to use tweezers for a lot of these. That's up to you, that's optional. There will be drilling involved. I recommend a drill press. We'll get to that later, but you're going to need a 5/16 bit and a 12mm bit. I know I'm mixing my measuring standards, but that's how it works best. And some toothpicks. You will also need, and this might frighten some of you, a soldering iron. Yes, we are going to have to do 6 solders and 6 desolders to complete the installation. We're going to start off with the chassis. The first step is disassembling it. If you're watching this, I'm sure you've been to Savi's and, well, you did the other end of this, so now it's time to take it apart so that we can make your saber awesome. And there we go. Throw those pieces aside. We're going to take apart our switch assembly and we are going to say goodbye to our kyber crystal. Oh, we can keep it. I've got a bunch over there. They're great for display items, but we're not going to need it anymore. So with that done, I got my scrap ball set aside and we're down to the main chassis. Chassis is held together by a series of 8 Torx screws that will separate both sides of it. So we're going to remove those right now. Got the first end off. This is the speaker side, blade side. We'll call it that for the purposes of this. This silver piece right here is just a sleeve that covers over it. So we can set that aside. This, hold on to. You will definitely need this for the final build. And we will do a similar thing to the blade side. We have all 8 screws removed. We are getting the blade side shroud off. It can be a little sticky. There we go. We are good on that. If you ever get confused about which side goes to which, your blade side has the little windows in it and the speaker side does not. To separate the speaker side of your chassis, we are first going to get in here and find this little ribbon cable. Getting my tweezers out here. We're going to pull this out and disconnect by lifting straight up very gently. After the ribbon cable is disconnected, you have a small 2-wire connection in here. You can lift up on that, and your main chassis has now been removed. So now that we have the original speaker assembly chassis battery holder all out, got a lot of it done so far. We need to remove everything from inside of the old Kyber chamber, and there is just a sliding panel right here that you can take all the way out. This, we're keeping this, absolutely. This can go away, and we'll disconnect all of this once we get the blade housing apart. To get into the internals of the blade housing has what I think to be the most difficult part of this entire procedure. There is, I don't know if you can see it here, but this piece right here is a solid ring that needs to come off, but it's held in by a series of clips. I've tried a bunch of different ways to release them, and if you've been on the YouTubes like I have, you know the best way is with some toothpicks. Okay, the right place to get these, there's 2 channels here for the adapters on the blade. So if you use that as your center line, we're going to do it on diagonals from that. So we're going to get one in here. We're going to get one over here. Don't work them in too far because then it pushes the others a little farther, makes it harder, like I just did to get it done. So we're going to put it in just a little bit. And we're going to squeeze it slightly to get that in there. There we go. I just felt something good there. Might get this with only 3. All right, I am squeezing and just gently twisting. We are not using too much effort here. Okay, it's close. It is very close. We are not there yet. There it comes. And there we go. That is the hardest part completed. Now that this guy's finally taken care of, and yes, we need to hold on to this, we go ahead and disassemble the blade side of the hilt. There was 1 screw for the main assembly here, and that's it. So with that screw gone, we go ahead and remove. Now, there are a couple of springs going on here. This is the back end of your Kyber crystal. That's going to pop out almost immediately. That can be disposed of. No more Kyber crystal. And then we expose the rest of this here. I'm running the wires through. We are going to reuse this whole black plastic assembly, so be careful with that. And we have another spring holding the blade plug or blade side adapter inside, and that's holding that in place, and that gives it that little resistance that you feel when you're putting your blade in. So we are going to carefully remove that. And now we have our blade connector. We're going to go ahead with our Phillips and remove 3 screws.
Hold the cap on.
Now, there are 6 holes in here, 3 for screws and 3 for the pins that provide power and signal to the blade. So I'm going to take all these off, keep them together, and on each of these pins is a small spring. I'm going to set those aside, remembering, of course, how they go in there. If you can see it here, there is a square round, there's a squared angular head and then the pin head. The square head with the hole goes down into the assembly. With the cap and the pins removed, we now need to get this circuit board out of here, and it's just a matter of prying it from here. The problem is there's tension on the wires that are soldered to the board. I'm just going to clip the wires right here at the end and give them a little help getting through there. We're going to run our own wires right back through that particular hole here in just a couple of minutes. Okay, this has a little glue on the back side of it. I had not noticed from previous builds that there's glue back there, so you can see that glue. We're going to have to get rid of that. All right, Here we are at my soldering station. So I mentioned there are 6 desolders and solders we have to do for this whole thing. We are at the first half of those. So we are going to need the first thing from the new kit. So in a little baggie here, we have multiple items, but the one we care about is, this is going to go, that'll plug into the chassis on the wires there. These are going to be soldered to the points that we are going to unsolder here. That'll be your new blade connector to run power and signal to the chassis. It's important to note so you don't get backwards on this entire thing. This side is front facing. The other side where the wires are connected also has your indications of positive, negative, and signal back here. So in order to remove these wires, we are actually going to heat the front side of it. If this is your first ever time soldering, please stop. Please get some solder, play with something, figure out how to do it. At least get 20 bad solders out before you started on your own. Trust me, I've ruined a lot of things before I don't know if I'm good, but at least competent at this. If you are a veteran solderer, well, you're probably making fun of what I'm doing right now. Have fun. There, we've gotten the first one off. There comes the second one. And there's the third one right there. There we go. Okay. I'm going to take a moment to clear off. The previous ones I've done did not have this adhesive on the blade circuit board. It's kind of annoying. You can see we have positive, negative, and this is the signal side. So for the provided wire, the positive is the red, the negative is the black, and the signal is the yellow. Now, I've already pre-tinned the wires here. They're cut to the length it should be fine. So like I said, I'm trying to do all the work for you for this kit. But before that, we have to run them through this guy. This is going to make it slightly more difficult, but we're using stock everything, so your blade is going to attach the way it originally did, which would be kind of nice. So we're going to feed all 3 of these wires right through here and just kind of pull it as close as you can. Give you a little more room to work with. Alrighty, we are all set here. What I'm going to do is heat up the back side of this guy, and then we can just get our new wire right in there. I try to give you a different angle on this as I heat up the back. Two out of 3 done. We have our PCB soldered for our blade connector in the chassis. Now it's time to put this back together. Okay, this can only go in one way. As you can see, there is a notch cut in the PCB right here, and there's a notch right here in the plastic surround. So we are gonna slide that in, give a gentle tug on the wires. Everything's gentle here, everything's gentle. Okay, now it's in. It doesn't have to be perfectly flush, because once we put it all back together, the screws are going to hold it into place. So with that done, we are going to put our pins back in. Remember, the pin is going to go in with the square-edged side with a little hole in it, not the blunt, circular, conical end. So we're going to do 1. And 2. And then 3. And then we are very, very gently going to put our cap back on. This has a notch in it. There's a notch here. It's the same notch we used to put the PCB back in. Make sure your pins are going through the holes. They are the smaller holes. The ones that are recessed are designed for our screws, which are going to put in there right now.
With our thumbs. There we go, easy enough.
And we are now ready to put this back in our chassis. So now we've got to put this back into the blade housing. The two sides are somewhat different. This one extends a bit farther out into the middle, and that's the one that we have to put the blade connector into. Also note that both sides have a small pin sticking out, and that is going to rest in this channel. That's where you get the kind of motion as you're inserting the blade, flipping it around, and that kind of click action there. So it's actually, there are two pieces of metal here. So we have to retract this and get that spring over this piece right here, which is a little difficult, but bring in my tweezers into play. There we go, we're in. And then I'm in the channel now. Quick note, as you're installing this back into your blade housing in the hilt, your adapter piece right here that you've just gotten soldered, you notice it has 3 pins here, and these two halves, one has these larger cutout for the larger pin and the blade, and this one has the smaller one. The larger one also has where you clip on, as I just discussed, where to get the spring on. Make sure that it's facing in this direction, that the top pin is heading towards the opening of this so that you get proper clearance for everything to operate. That will move. So we get to put this guy back together, which is not very complicated at all. We're going to put the other side back on. You may need to wiggle it a little bit to get them to click together. Going back to our single Phillips head screw from our little tray.
Get that back together.
Yep, everything's still connected, feels good. Now, just to make sure now that I got my blade housing back together, I'm gonna just test fit. Small pin, large pin. Insert that into there, and there we go. So we're good, we are good. Note that there is a large and a small channel, which corresponds to the large and small channels in this, but also there's a divot on one end that goes towards the front. So thankfully putting it on is nowhere near as difficult as taking it off. So we're gonna get this guy over here, slide it in, you're gonna get a little resistance, click, 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 and hey, we're done. Now we're going to go ahead and put the rest of the chassis back together. We've got our blade end, got our windows, which will line up. You got to kind of spin them until they get into the right spot here. Now, getting the sleeve back on is a little difficult. There is a channel that runs right along the top here. I don't know if that's reading on camera at all, but if you look down into the sleeve, there is a single larger piece that will fit into that channel. Hopefully it's reading on here. Getting it to line up is a little difficult, and even when it's perfectly lined up, it can take a little bit of muscle to get it lined up. So to get it over, so I'm in. I've also done this a few times. Following along and make sure, okay, my window came out of adjustment. And if you're wondering if your window is totally in the wrong place, it will click in ultimately, and then the centerpiece, or what formerly the crystal chamber, will fit over that, and those should all line up with the exception of that gap. And then we close it up with the sleeve, and we are back to our Torx driver, and we are going to put 4 screws in here. All right, we are almost done. Our new chassis. Holes have already been tapped for it to be installed using the same screws. Should slide perfectly right on in. It's your choice now if you want to connect up the blade. Just like this. The blade, the power switch, and the charger all use completely different connectors, so you can't get them wrong. I guess you could, but you're trying really hard at this point. So we've got the chassis in. We don't need to mess with that anymore. I'm going to slide the sleeve from this side on over. Line up the holes. This does not lock into position like the top one does, so you just kind of eyeball it so your holes are in the right spot. Put in 4 more screws. New chassis is very tight. It's not actually, the top wiggles a little bit more, and that's how it came. So you are done with the chassis. It is time to move on to the switch. We're going to talk about switches for a couple of minutes. This particular saber is a 2nd generation Peace and Justice. Obviously, there are a multitude of different switches. We've got 2 generations of saber, 8 different ones. So there's 16 possible switch setups you could be running. Inside, they're all the same. But attaching these is kind of up to you how you want to do it. So first off, we have the charging port, which has a lovely little Wingscribe SaberWorks branded cover. It's not a kill key. It is a charging port cover. When it's installed, the saber will still function. And then you have an illuminated AV switch. Both of these have to be installed somewhere in here. And to do that, we are going to have to drill. Where you place your items is kind of up to you, but first I'm going to show you how the switch comes off. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to use the term switch side. And this is just holds the kyber crystal in, so it's got a little plastic adapter in here. We're going to take both of these apart, and I'll go quickly over pros and cons of how to set this up. So there's 4 tiny little screws in here, Phillips head, and you won't be using these again. And then an additional Phillips that holds the slider to your button. So on the switch side, you will have a cutout. If this will be standard for any of them. Good and bad points. It's a perfect place to insert your 12mm switch. You can drill this out, and this guy is going to fit just perfectly in there. That is very easy. The downside to that is you're installing it on the back side, because this gets installed via a nut. So getting that nut in past these 4 support pillars, I guess you can call them, a little bit difficult. It's not the end of the world. My first saber, I converted. I did that. Once it's torqued down, it should be there forever. So that is one option. If you wanted to put your charging port in here, the problem with that is it is bigger, so you're going to have gaps in it. You could fill it, you could putty it, you could use a washer. You're looking at doing the kit. You're on your own for this. However you want to do it, there's no right or wrong way. Another possibility would be, you could put this one on this side, charger on that side. You could put them both in line. You could put them both on, oh, I didn't take this off. Yeah, a little kyber crystal holder right here. And get rid of those. You could potentially do one up, like maybe the charger up here, just north of those, and then your main switch down there, hit that. That's completely up to you. You should have enough wire for the connectors to wire it pretty much any way you want to. But for now, we're gonna take a break, go out to the drill press, and I'm going to drill these. All right, we are back from the drill press, and we had a couple of setbacks. Some advice moving forward. I had put the switch into the kyber crystal holder side of the switch assembly, and I was going to put the charger into where the switch would go in the original bit. That was not a good idea. I had to grind significantly on both sides of this. Previously, I'd done the switch on the switch side and the charger on the crystal holding side, and it's worked out just fine. So keep that in mind moving forward. But anyway, installing these, we have the switch side with a 12mm hole. Easy enough. We slide the switch through. Be mindful of the wiring, not to break any of the solders. And I have a nut. Get that to a decent hand tight. Don't go crazy with this. We just need about a quarter turn with the pliers, and that guy's not going anywhere. So we're halfway done here. And then for the charger, you may need to loosen these depending upon how the wiring ends up in the former crystal chamber. So keep that in mind. So this one, the nut goes on the top, and I'm doing something a little special ultimately with this one. There's not a lot of room in here. This will come with a washer, little spring washer, but there's not enough room, there's not enough thread for that. So I've got it on. That also is not going anywhere. Now we are all set to fully assemble the chassis. I like to start off with the switch side because this connector is kind of small, so we get this one in first, and making sure, of course, that it's on the right side because we still have the blue to blue this way. Y'all remember your time back at Savi's, right? And there, that is good. And if you want to leave it open a little bit to have a little more room to work, that is absolutely fine. For the charging connector, there is a clip to one side, and this little clip right here is going to go right over top of that. So we're going to get that into there. And you have to be kind of gentle putting it all in there. Don't want to gum up any of the wires, don't want to break any of the solders. So we need to push some things aside. And there we go. Let's put it back together. And there we go. One thing I'd like to mention, they're not included in the kit. Hopefully you've got them already or have easy access to a hardware store. These are 1.5-inch plumbing washers. I am not the first person to come up with this idea, but they do a lot to hold your chassis, to keep that rattle out of your chassis. So I'm gonna slide this on. When putting these on, be very careful of the threads. These threads are really the weak part of the original chassis. It's very easy to cross thread, to break these. I've had to repair a few here and there, and getting a new chassis piece is not something you can do quickly or easily. So be careful for that. So get these back on, and let's fire it up. Obviously, I'm gonna put power to it right now. It will not be able to ignite the blade because the blade is next, but let's make sure we did it right so far.
Power on.
Looks good. Power off. It's a 10-second hold.
Moonfield.
And that's changing sound fonts, which you can do with your phone, and I'll go over that in another video.
Power off.
There we are. Now it's time to replace the LEDs in our blade. This is actually fairly easy compared to the rest of it. So we start off with 3 Phillips screws right here in the base of your blade. Now this portion of the blade here has a pretty tight friction fit. I use my handy dandy fingernail to kind of break that tension on it. There is a decal here that also holds it together, but we'll be replacing that shortly. Now we want to lift it where the seam is right here. We want to separate evenly. There we go. Got this side off. Let's go with the other side. Okay. Now, we've got the two main pieces of the housing off here. We're gonna slide the blade plastic off. Now, we have these two locking pins that are gonna go into your assembly. Just make sure we've got a big and a small. I just kind of keep these with their respective halves. And then we see the original LEDs compared with our new LEDs. Kind of a big upgrade. So we need to get this secondary piece apart. Separating this inner piece is similar to the outside. This is actually not held by any screws. So we just lift, and once again, big side, little side here. Keep that in mind. Now we're gonna pull out, let's keep this piece of styrofoam. We're definitely gonna reuse that. So we wanna get all of these LEDs out of here. And then most of this is gonna be trash, but we're gonna need this connector assembly because these three little dots are what those three pins from inside of your hilt are gonna touch to convey power and signal. So let's start taking this apart. Thankfully, it's only a single screw. This will unfurl a little bit. And we're gonna take this circuit board out of this housing, and we're gonna take the whole bit over to the soldering table. Here we are at the solder station. I want to go over a couple of things before I start into our second set of soldering today. First and foremost, the pinout here, it's similar to what's inside of the hilt. We have a positive here, red going to positive. We have a negative, black going to negative, and the signal wire is white originally, but on our redone string, it is going to be a green wire. Second thing to worry about here is this little cap that's going to go over the assembly here. We are going to run the wires through this portion of it. There's a cutout to one side. That side does not have the wires run through. It's going to go through this hole. Make sure this is pointing towards your LEDs. And additionally, you can see these are kind of canted in that direction. We're going to try to run our wires the same way so that it's going to fit nicely through this and not get bound up. So let's start desoldering. All right, I've got this back in with my handy dandy clips. And as you can see, here is the board. So we're just going to desolder these three. And one. Two. And three. Notice I have this installed, as I said, with this portion heading towards the LEDs. I'm in the side away from the cutout, and we are all set to solder this all back together. I'm going to start off with the negative. Right, moving on to our signal wire, which is green in this case. And I'm just using the existing solder here. If you need to add more, that is totally your choice. And then we are off to our positive. And it's just as simple as that. All right, we're ready to assemble the plug end of the blade. We got our soldered printed circuit board, and this is going to fit perfectly into the cap here. And because we sent our wires out the correct way through this plastic cap, that is going to fit on perfectly there. I've got my screw to reinstall. And we are almost home. We just have to get the LEDs into the blade and clear the wires through. Next step is going to be putting the LEDs into the blade. As we did in the beginning, we want to kind of flatten these out a little bit because they can tend to bend up a little bit when they're inside of a nice long plastic tube. They're not going to be a problem. But we need to get it into this styrofoam sleeve, which can bind up. So we're just gonna do it gently, and we're gonna squeeze every so often to get that in there. And actually we can pull that all the way out of the blade. Might make things a little bit easier. And once again, move slowly. Don't be afraid to back off a little bit. This is not the most scientific process. But if ever you get bound up, just give the styrofoam a little squeeze to allow the LEDs to go through. There we go. Okay, we'll just see it out at the end here, just a little tip. And we're gonna pull it back and slide it, not all the way, but most of the way in. Now we have to rebuild this. Okay, the next step is to get this inner housing on. Once again, making sure big side, little side, big side of the blade, little side. So this goes on the outside here. And this pin goes through right here, and we want to make sure that none of our wires are in the way. This can get a little bit fiddly. Got to kind of find a spot to get these in and leave enough room for your cap to be where it needs to be. Go. That should put us in decent shape. Okay, and from here we can then feed, once that's all together, that gets fed into the blade, at which point we can add our small and large pins, because once they're inside of the blade, they are not going anywhere. And last but not least, we have our outer shell. This is the small side. I'm going to get that on. Now, to fit this part in there, notice the cutout here. The small pin side of this has a notch. So that needs to, it's right at the bottom of the rectangular piece here. So we need to make sure that that is settled right into that groove, and it'll lock in very nicely. And we're gonna get that through there. Get that back in there. And you may, if the wires are getting into this hole right here, you may need to just gently push them aside to gain the clearance needed. Remember, we do have a screw going into there, very gently, obviously. And we are going back together. It's time to replace the last 3 screws. One final little bit for those of you out there with multiple sabers and multiple blades for your Savis or Legacy lightsabers. To differentiate one converted for Wingscribe SaberWorks use, I have provided with a decal so that you can cover up the yellow decal that came on it. So you now know this one is only good for your newly converted saber. And there we go. You are done. Let's fire this up. All right, let's see how we did.
Power on.
Not bad. And now you've converted your Savi saber to Neopixel.